In recent years, 3 African military juntas have created their own economic bloc. East Africa's trade jumped 27% in 1 year, and the West is watching its entire playbook fall apart in real time. Africa isn't just joining other people's alliances anymore. They're building their own, and they're doing it in ways that cut the West completely out of the picture. We're not talking about diplomatic summits where nothing happens. We're talking about actual confederations with joint militaries, shared currencies, and trade systems that don't need dollars or euros to function. And it's happening so fast that Western governments are scrambling to figure out how they lost control. Let's start with the wildest one. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger didn't just kick out French troops and tell the West to leave. They created an entirely new bloc called the Alliance of Sahel States. In December 2025, they launched a joint military force with a unified command in Niamey. They've got their own passport. They've got their own TV station. They withdrew from ECOWAS, the regional bloc that's been around for 50 years. And they're building their own investment bank so they don't have to borrow from Western lenders. On February 22, 2025, they officially unveiled their flag. This isn't symbolic. This is 3 countries merging into a confederation with 70 million people, massive gold and uranium reserves, and a mutual defense pact that says if you attack one of us, you attack all of us. These aren't stable democracies holding hands and singing about unity. These are military governments led by young officers in their 30s and 40s who overthrew their predecessors because those leaders were too friendly with France. And now they're building something that looks less like a regional alliance and more like a breakaway state. They left the Francophonie, the French-speaking organization France created to maintain influence. They're reportedly planning their own currency to replace the CFA franc that France has controlled since colonial times. And they've made it very clear: no Western troops, no Western conditions, no Western control. The West calls this instability. The leaders call it sovereignty. And whether it works or collapses, it's already changed the game because other African countries are watching and asking themselves why they're still taking orders from former colonial powers. Now flip to East Africa, where something completely different but equally disruptive is happening. The East African community, which includes Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, the DRC, and now Somalia, just posted a 27% increase in intra-regional trade in 1 year. Total trade within the bloc went from $14.2 billion in June 2024 to $18 billion in June 2025. That's not foreign aid. That's Africans trading with Africans, building supply chains that don't depend on Europe or Asia. And here's the part that should terrify every economist in Washington. The East African community recorded a trade surplus of $800 million in the first quarter of 2025. A surplus. African countries are supposed to run deficits, borrow money, and stay dependent. But exports from East Africa surged 47% in Q1 2025, while imports only grew 4%. They're selling more than they're buying, which means money is flowing into the region instead of draining out. Trade within Africa now accounts for 27.5% of total EAC trade, up from almost nothing a decade ago. Rwanda and Tanzania are linking their payment systems so people can send money across borders instantly without conversion fees. The East African community adopted a 35% common external tariff, meaning they're acting like a single economic bloc when dealing with the rest of the world. Somalia, which everyone wrote off as a failed state, joined the EAC in March 2024 and is now part of a market with 186 million consumers. The DRC, which has more mineral wealth than almost any country on Earth, joined in 2022. These aren't symbolic memberships. These countries are actually integrating, and that integration is generating real economic growth. But it's not just the Sahel and East Africa. Southern Africa has SADC, which includes 16 countries, and is pushing for a customs union and common currency. West Africa still has ECOWAS, though it's been severely weakened by the exit of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. North Africa has the Arab Maghreb Union. And sitting on top of all of this is the African Continental Free Trade Area, which covers all 54 African countries and creates a single market of 1.4 billion people. AfCFTA went live in 2021, and while implementation has been slow, it's moving. In 2024, Africa's total trade grew by 13.9% to $1.5 trillion. Intra-African trade grew 12.4% to $220 billion. That's still only about 16% of Africa's total trade, far below the 60 to 70% you see in Europe or Asia. But it's growing, and every percentage point it grows is money that's no longer controlled by Western banks and corporations. Here's what makes all of this so dangerous to the old order. These alliances aren't asking for Western approval. The Alliance of Sahel States didn't consult Paris before creating a confederation. The East African community didn't ask Washington before linking payment systems. They're just doing it. And when they need funding or technology or military support, they're turning to China, Russia, India, Turkey, and the Gulf states, instead of the IMF and World Bank. Russia is all over the Sahel. After Wagner Group mercenaries helped secure the military governments in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they've been replaced by Africa Corps, a Russian state-controlled force. About 1,500 Russian personnel are in Mali alone. Burkina Faso signed a deal with Russia to build a nuclear power plant. Mali signed agreements for nuclear infrastructure and training. These aren't just defense deals. Russia is embedding itself in the energy and technology sectors of countries that used to rely entirely on France. China is playing a different game. They're not sending mercenaries. They're funding the infrastructure that makes regional integration possible. Roads, railways, ports, power grids, all the boring stuff that actually allows trade to happen. And they're doing it through loans that don't come with political conditions. The problem is, those loans still have to be paid back. And if they can't be, China ends up owning the infrastructure. But from an African government's perspective, that's still better than the IMF forcing you to fire teachers and privatize hospitals. India is becoming a huge player too. India's trade with Africa hit $98 billion in 2023, and it's growing fast. India supplies cheap pharmaceuticals, offers technology partnerships, and doesn't lecture about human rights. Turkey has expanded its presence in the Sahel, with defense and energy ministers visiting Niger in July 2024 to discuss mining, security, and trade deals. The UAE is investing in ports, agriculture, and tech startups across the continent. All of these countries are competing with each other for access to African markets and resources, and that competition is driving up the value of deals for African governments. It's basic economics. When you only have one buyer, they set the price. When you have 5 buyers, you can negotiate. Western governments are panicking because they're realizing they don't have leverage anymore. France got kicked out of the Sahel militarily and is now irrelevant there politically. The United States lost its massive drone base in Niger and has almost no presence in the region. The European Union keeps launching initiatives to compete with China, but they're always too little, too late, and they still come with conditions that African countries don't want to accept. And the tools the West used to control Africa don't work anymore. Sanctions? These countries are trading with Russia, China, and each other, so Western sanctions barely hurt. Cutting off aid, Chinese loans and investments fill the gap, threatening to withhold IMF support. The new development bank offers an alternative, kicking them out of SWIFT. BRICS is building its own payment system. The entire architecture of Western dominance was built on the assumption that there were no alternatives. Now there are alternatives, and African countries are using them. Is this going to work perfectly? Maybe not right now, but the future of these alliances look bright. The Alliance of Sahel States is made up of military dictatorships that have postponed elections indefinitely. Violence in the region is getting worse, not better, despite all the talk about sovereignty and independence. The East African community is chronically underfunded because half its members aren't paying their dues. The DRC owes over $20 million. Burundi owes $16 million. South Sudan owes $15 million. The EAC Parliament has been on indefinite break since July 2025 because there's no budget. AfCFTA is supposed to eliminate 90% of tariffs, but many countries haven't even submitted their tariff schedules yet. Infrastructure across Africa is still terrible. Corruption is still rampant and governance is still weak in most places. But here's the thing. None of that changes the fact that the old system is collapsing. France used to be able to call African presidents and tell them what to do. Now 6 countries have kicked them out entirely. The United States used to dominate African security policy. Now Russia and China are more influential in huge parts of the continent. The IMF and World Bank used to be the only option for financing. Now there's the New Development Bank, Chinese policy banks, Indian credit lines, and Gulf sovereign wealth funds. SWIFT used to be the only way to move money internationally. Now there's BRICS bridge, PAPs, and bilateral currency swap agreements. For ordinary Africans, this is both hopeful and terrifying. Hopeful because regional integration, if it actually works, means jobs. It means you can start a business in Rwanda and sell products across East Africa without dealing with 8 different currencies and customs systems. It means manufacturers can build factories knowing they have access to a market of hundreds of millions of people. It means farmers can sell crops regionally instead of being forced to export to Europe and then import food back at higher prices. But it's terrifying because these new alliances are being led by military, governments, authoritarian regimes, and leaders who aren't accountable to their people. The Alliance of Sahel States might be independent from France, but it's also cracking down on journalists, postponing elections, and killing civilians in the name of fighting terrorism. East African integration sounds great until you realize Rwanda's government removes critics and Uganda's president has been in power for 39 years. This is the messy reality of what comes after Western dominance. Africa is building new alliances, new trade systems, and new power structures. Some of them will work, some will fail. Some will make ordinary people's lives better. Some will just create new forms of exploitation with different faces. But what's undeniable is that the old order, where the West set the rules and Africa followed them, is over. These alliances aren't perfect. They might not even succeed, but they're real, they're happening, and they're reshaping how an entire continent engages with the world. And the West has no idea how to stop it.